Welcome back to Attacking and Defending Active Directory. Continuing our discussion on local privilege escalation, let's discuss one very interesting option which we have in enterprise environments. That is enterprise applications. Uh, Enterprise environments are full of in-house developed applications or web consoles of different other tools and appliances. These web consoles or these applications are generally not developed while keeping security in mind. Many of them are full of uh, web vulnerabilities, and many of them also provide capabilities to run commands onto the OS level. So, although not very strictly Active Directory related, what we have here is what we are discussing here is something which you can find all the time in an enterprise network. Now, in case of those enterprise applications running on Windows networks or Windows machines, there is a good chance that the application is running as either system or a local administrator. Uh, One case study or one particular example which stands out when I talk about enterprise applications is the continuous integration tools or CI tools. CI tools, which are used for build management, are widely used across enterprises, especially where in those enterprises where there is a lot of commit to any code repository. Now, this makes the CI tools very interesting for abuse. Now, when we talk about CI tools, there is a pattern when we try to evaluate the security of their web consoles. The CI tools, because they do build management for us, have the capability to run OS level commands as a function, right? That's what it's a feature. That's what we have been doing. We have been doing feature abuse up to now, or misconfiguration abuses up to now. So that feature allows us to, if we can compromise the web console of any such CI tool, it provides us as a feature the ability to run commands at the OS level. One very interesting such tool is Jenkins. Jenkins is one of the most widely used continuous integration tool. And please keep in mind that whenever I mention Jenkins in this video or in the course, that particular abuse is almost for sure applicable to all the popular continuous integration tools, right? So we are just picking Jenkins for two reasons. One, it is very widely used. Second, it is freely available. So there are so many interesting aspects with Jenkins, right? For example, before 2.x, there was no default authentication. Still, there is no protection against brute force attacks. There is no password complexity if someone is using Jenkins built-in user database. And there are so many interesting things. On a Windows machine, a Jenkins master or a Jenkins slave would need at least local administrator user privileges. By default, it is system, but it would need at least the local administrator privileges. We have a Jenkins server running on the DCOP CI machine, which is 172.16.3.11. Once again, because we have skipped the recon part where we do port scans, etc., we can safely assume that we have already enumerated this or we just know it. Now, this is what Jenkins look like. If we browse to 172.16.3.11, and there are so many Jenkins instances exposed to the internet uh, with such messed up misconfigurations that it is uh, uh, it is hard to believe unless you check for it using Google or Shodan that someone can actually leave such a service, such a badly configured service exposed to the internet. It is not always Jenkins' fault. It is also the fault of those who deploy it, but nonetheless. So this is what Jenkins look like. It is version 2.138.2 uh, with anonymous read privileges. So thankfully in 2.x versions, you do not have anonymous read privileges, but most of the Jenkins instances you will find, even on the internet, would have at least anonymous read privileges. What those privileges allow us? Those privileges allow us to have a look at the list of users on the Jenkins instance and the information about the build executor. So for us, the build executor, we have just one build executor which we can see here. That is a Windows Server 2016 machine, and Jenkins will run in a 32-bit process. That is all we can know. Now have Jenkins does not have any protection against brute force attacks. What does that mean? That means if we can enumerate the list of users on a Jenkins instance, we can simply brute force any of these users without having any fear of lockout, etc. Please keep in mind that holds true only if the users are being used by Jenkins own, that is Jenkins own user database is being used. That would be generally visible by looking at user IDs, right? Jenkins provides capabilities to bind authentication with Active Directory or an organization's G Suite, etc., and some other options. So please be aware of before running a brute force attack. So on our Jenkins instance, we have 3 users. Now, first, let's have a look at what we can do if we have access as an administrator to this Jenkins instance or any Jenkins instance. Once again, you will find uh, Jenkins instances exposed both on the internet and more on an internal uh, operation where there would be no authentication for the Jenkins instance. If you know the URL, you would be an administrator, or the password of the administrator would be really easy to guess. So in our case, let's go for the Jenkins admin user. How do we know it is an admin? There's no way. We just know it somehow, right? And the password for this user is not easy to brute force, so I'm going to simply use it. Why? I'm showing you how we can abuse the privileges of administrator to execute OS level commands. So Jenkins provides a script console to the administrators. If we browse to /script, we can run arbitrary groovy script in this script console, right? That means with admin privileges, we can use something like this. Let's simply run who am I here. Let's run it. So you can see that we are running as a domain user called dcorp, and the user is ci as a domain user because we can see here dcorp, and the username is ci admin. Now it is almost sure that this user would be a local administrator. Why? Because Jenkins need those privileges. Also, please keep in mind that this runs on the build master, that is on the machine where Jenkins master is installed and not the slaves, which makes it very interesting. So this is what does this mean? This means that we can have our payload, let's say a PowerShell download execute cradle, which runs, let's say, a Metasploit, a Metapreter agent, or any tool of your choice, right? Or a Cobalt Strike beacon, or whatever you want, you can run from here. So that is what we can do if we have access to the admin console of the Jenkins instance. Now, what if we do not have administrator privileges here? As I said earlier, Jenkins does not enforce a brute force protection or a password policy. What does that mean? That means the users can have even a single character password, right? So what we can do is we can always brute force it with the help of tools or even Burp Suite. But what I would suggest based on my experience is if you find a Jenkins instance where the built-in database is being used, which you can guess by having a look at the user IDs, it always makes sense to use the username as password and the reverse of the username as password, right? For example, if it's manager, if the username is manager, try manager as username and the reverse of manager as the username, right? So let's try that now. Let's try it for manager, and the reverse of manager REGANAM, which doesn't work. But if I use manager here and the same thing as password, we can actually log on to this. So this is made up, obviously, right? You are going to be lucky, but probably not this lucky when doing it in an actual assessment. Now, once we are logged in, what we can do without admin privileges is, if our user has the capability to configure builds, then we can actually run OS level command or wherever our project is built. What does that mean? That would be clear in a moment. Let's try and see if we have the capability to configure this project. No, we don't. Otherwise, we would have a configure, uh, a configure icon here, an icon, and it would be written configure this project or simply configure. Similarly, we do not have it on any of the projects. Now, please keep this in mind. Jenkins allows a user to have configure privileges on a single machine, right? That means that if we do not have configure privileges on a single project, we may have it on multiple or on some other project. So an easy way to check is to go to browse to the configure URL once you are inside the project job, the project name /configure. If we have the privileges, we'll have the configuration page open up. Otherwise, it would be an access denied. So this is useful in Burp Suite, right? We can simply get copy a list of all the projects on a Jenkins instance and try this URL by just changing this particular part, right? So that is how we can look for if our particular user has permissions to configure a build. Now, if once our user has the privileges to configure a build, we can always go to the configuration tab, add a build step, and add execute Windows batch command, which allows us to run the OS level commands with the same privileges, right? That is, without having even admin access to the Jenkins instance, we can execute privileges as system or as a local administrator on different machines. Let's have a look at, right? So let's have a look what we can do without having admin privileges there. Uh, so as you might have guessed, the third user, which we call build user, if we try the password same as its username, let's run it build user, we get once again the password works. And now if we go to a project, we can see that there is a configure option here, right? If we go to the URL or click on that particular configure option, we are dropped into the configuration page for this particular project. Once again, uh, Jenkins allow project-based authorization. That means your user may have build privileges or configure privileges on one of the projects, may not have on others. So make sure that you check it on all the projects in case of a real world scenario, right? So, okay, let's leave this one. So this is the abusable part, right? You can see here, we can always add a build step. And if the project executes the build on a Windows machine, we can have an execute Windows batch command. If the project executes build on a Linux box, we can run it on execute shell, and there are so many things which we can do. So what we are going to do here, simply we will add an execute Windows batch command and simply run. Let's see if we can run both PowerShell, and let's run a native executable from PowerShell called Who Am I. Another thing to note here is the project in a real world scenario, the project you are trying or targeting may have multiple builds already, and Jenkins by default does not execute build steps if the very first one fails, right? So if you are targeting a real world instance and you are authorized by the target organization to change build order, then you can simply make your own build step to be the first one, right? So that at least in case of a successful build, at least this will be executed, right? This is quite handy in case of multiple build steps already running before your fill step executes, right? So I've copied that, remove that part. Let's save it and run it. So if I have a look at the console output here, you can see that we can still execute OS level commands with the privileges of the local administrator, right? So even without being administrator on the Jenkins instance, we can actually execute commands onto the OS with the privileges of the local administrator, right? There is no need to guess if this particular user is a local administrator. We can always run the net local group uh, command, net local group administrators command on that machine with the help of the same thing, right? Now, in fact, let's run that so that we are quite sure of. So let's run net. Let's run C. It's PowerShell net local group administrators. I think that should be the command. Let's run it. So as you can see that the net local group administrators command was executed, and we are actually an administrator on that particular machine, right? So now, no, sorry. Now, if you want to execute a PowerShell script, you saw that I removed that part because I'm leaving it for you to try. You can run PowerShell scripts. Let's say if you want to do that using many methods, you can use the encoded scripts using PowerShell-E and the encoded part, or you can use download and execute Cradle. Uh, Once again, we are taking PowerShell as an example for payload. Feel free to run, let's say, an agent or slave of your favorite toolkit, run .NET assemblies using execute assembly or whatever you want to try, right? So this is how we abuse enterprise applications. We took Jenkins as an example here, that how we can abuse that functionality to get OS level command execution with high privileges. Now this brings us to our next learning objective. We are discussing local privilege escalation. So there are three ways you can do it. Now, three ways we are required to do it, or would like to do it. One is to exploit a service on dcop student X, that is your own machine, and elevate privileges to the local administrator. Please keep in mind that when you get access to the machine, it is mimicking a foothold machine, right? We are using RDP just for the sake of it, just for the convenience. So you need to exploit a service and elevate privileges to the local administrator on that particular machine, dcop student X, your own machine, right? If you are student 11, your machine would be dcop student 11. The second task is to, or the second objective is to identify a machine in the domain where your own user has local administrative access. So if you are student 7, then your user would be student 7 as well. So you need to find out for your own user. The third option or the third objective is to use privileges of a user on Jenkins, the one we saw just now, right? On 172.16.3.11, which is our dcorp CI, our CI server, you need to get administrative privileges onto the CI server by abusing Jenkins, right? Once again, feel free to use any tool you want. PowerShell scripts are used just as an example. And do it, if you want, do it as a challenge. Do all of the tasks or objectives as challenge. If you want a walkthrough, please have a look at the solution videos. So that would be all for this video. Thank you very much for watching.